Elizabeth arrived in Lagos with a sense of purpose and pride. Her daughter Cynthia had just given birth to a baby girl, and Elizabeth had come for Omugwo to care for mother and child during recovery. Cynthia and her husband Joe lived in a well-furnished apartment in Lekki Phase 1. The compound was neat, the air-conditioned cab ride was smooth, and Elizabeth already felt like she had stepped into another world. She smiled as Joe opened the gate, warmly helping her with her luggage. "Welcome, Mama," Joe said, gently hugging her. Elizabeth noticed how tall and handsome he was, his deep voice calm and reassuring. Cynthia stepped out with the baby in her arms, glowing from motherhood. Elizabeth felt proud and emotional seeing her daughter so happy. But that joy soon turned to confusion. She watched Joe take the baby from Cynthia and kiss her forehead gently. Later, he cleaned the kitchen, served Cynthia her meal, and offered to stay up for the night feed. That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She lay on the sofa in the living room, listening to the laughter between husband and wife behind their closed bedroom door. Why didn't my own husband ever treat me like that, she wondered. The thought settled in her heart like a rock, one she couldn't quite shake off. Elizabeth began to study Joe's every move. The way he placed a pillow behind Cynthia's back during breastfeeding, how he massaged her shoulders, and how he said, "I love you," so easily. These gestures pierced her deeply. She felt like an outsider in a space where she expected to be the center of attention. At first, she masked her feelings with busyness, cooking, cleaning, advising. But bitterness started to seep into her tone. "Cynthia, your baby's neck is not properly supported. Hold her like this," Elizabeth corrected sharply one morning, snatching the baby from her daughter's arms. Joe, witnessing this, stepped in gently. "Mama, Cynthia's learning. She's doing well." Elizabeth didn't like the way he defended her. Something about his calm confidence made her feel challenged. Later that evening, Elizabeth prepared pounded yam and egusi soup, Joe's favorite, and served it personally. "You're lucky, Joe," she said with a forced laugh. "A good woman always makes sure her man eats well." Joe smiled awkwardly, thanked her, and walked away. Cynthia, watching the exchange, felt a knot of discomfort. She began to suspect that her mother's affection was becoming strange. Elizabeth, meanwhile, convinced herself she was only being nice. But deep down, a storm had started, fed by years of emotional neglect and a growing obsession with the love her daughter received so effortlessly. The days passed, and Elizabeth became more involved in the household, not just with the baby, but also with Joe. She made sure his shirts were ironed before work, brewed his morning tea, and even sent him long voice notes on WhatsApp reminding him to rest. "Mama is just being caring," Joe told Cynthia. But Cynthia wasn't convinced. One Saturday, while Joe and Cynthia were watching a movie in the living room, Elizabeth came out in a bright wrapper and matching blouse. Her face was powdered, and she had applied a bold red lipstick. "I made pepper soup," she announced with a smile, standing directly in front of the TV. Joe paused the film politely. "Thank you, Mama," he said, while Cynthia raised an eyebrow. Elizabeth took her seat, right between them. As the movie resumed, she leaned into Joe's side with a loud laugh. "This man is funny, yo," she said, pointing at the screen, although Joe hadn't even laughed. Cynthia stood up quietly and took the baby to the bedroom. The tension in the house was now unavoidable. Later that night, Cynthia confronted her husband. "Joe, this is getting uncomfortable. My mom is behaving odd." Joe sighed. "I feel it too. But how do we talk to her without causing more trouble?" Neither of them had answers, but both knew things had shifted. Love had brought Elizabeth into their home. Jealousy was threatening to keep her there. By the third week, Elizabeth had started openly criticizing Cynthia in front of Joe. "You see the way your husband comes home tired and still helps with the baby? Back in our time, we never disturbed our men like that," she said while folding clothes. Cynthia clenched her fists but said nothing. Joe gave Cynthia a knowing glance, silently urging her to stay calm. But it didn't stop there. Elizabeth began offering Joe unsolicited advice on how to handle Cynthia. "You're too soft with her. Let her grow up," she'd say. Joe, trying to maintain peace, would just nod. But he'd later reassure Cynthia behind closed doors. "I only listen because I don't want to disrespect her. But I know you're doing great." The final straw came when Elizabeth walked in on Cynthia and Joe having a quiet moment with their daughter. Instead of turning away, she stood watching them with a distant look, her face unreadable. "Sometimes I wish I had what you two have," she murmured. That night, Cynthia broke down in tears. "She's not just here for Omugwo anymore. She wants your attention, your love," she cried. Joe held her, troubled. "We need to talk to her, before this becomes something worse." The harmony of their home was cracking, and Cynthia felt like she was slowly losing her safe space to her own mother. Joe and Cynthia gently invited Elizabeth to the dining table the next morning for a conversation. Cynthia began, "Mama, we love and appreciate you, but things are getting uncomfortable." Elizabeth's face hardened instantly. "Uncomfortable? After everything I've done? You think I came here to steal your husband?" "No one said that," Joe replied carefully. "But you've been acting differently. It's affecting Cynthia. It's affecting all of us." Elizabeth stood up suddenly, eyes fierce. "So this is how you repay me? Drive me out like a common maid?" Her voice rose, and the baby began to cry in the room. From that day, she stopped helping around the house. She stayed in her room all day, only coming out when Joe was home. She would greet him sweetly, serve him food, then return to silence. The warmth that once filled their home had turned to walking on eggshells. Joe started avoiding home altogether, working late or spending time in his car. Cynthia felt isolated, trying to manage her newborn and her emotionally wounded mother under the same roof. Every attempt to repair the relationship ended with accusations and tears. Eventually, Cynthia's elder sister, Dumabi, was called in to mediate. Dumabi, firm and older, arrived from Abadan with one purpose, to get Mama home. Dumabi sat quietly, listening as Cynthia explained everything. Then she went to Elizabeth's room and found her staring blankly out the window. "Mama, why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You're hurting Cynthia. You're hurting yourself." Elizabeth turned away. "You wouldn't understand. All my life, no man has looked at me with such love. Your father, he never cared like Joe does. And now I see it in this house, what I never had." Her voice cracked. Dumabi took her hand gently. "Mama, Joe is Cynthia's husband. What you're feeling is not wrong, but how you've handled it is. You are not competing with your daughter. You are her support, not her rival." Tears finally fell from Elizabeth's eyes. She hadn't cried in years. Her pain had built up like stones in her chest, her regrets, her lost youth, the affection she never received. She was ashamed, but more than anything, she was tired. The sisters gave her time. Joe, meanwhile, began spending evenings at home again, cautiously optimistic. For the first time in weeks, the silence at the dinner table was replaced by hesitant conversation. Elizabeth began to look at Cynthia with softer eyes. It was a slow process, but healing had begun. One night, Elizabeth came to Cynthia's room with a small bag in hand. "I think it's time for me to return to the village," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Cynthia looked up, surprised. "Are you sure, Mama?" "I'm sure," Elizabeth replied. "I came here thinking I was helping you, but I let my past control me. I'm sorry, my daughter." Cynthia stood and hugged her. For the first time in weeks, the embrace felt genuine. Joe entered moments later with the baby in his arms, and Elizabeth smiled warmly, this time without envy. The next morning, Dumabi accompanied Elizabeth to the park. She waved goodbye as the bus drove off, not with sadness, but with peace. In her heart, she knew she had a long journey of healing ahead, but she had taken the first step. Back in Lagos, Cynthia and Joe exhaled in relief. Their home began to feel like home again. Love returned to its rightful place, between husband and wife, without interference. They often laughed about the chaos of those early weeks, grateful they overcame it. Elizabeth returned months later for a brief visit, not to stay, but to celebrate China and I's dedication. This time, she didn't try to take the spotlight. She helped when asked, and smiled genuinely at Cynthia and Joe's love. And as she held her grandchild during the church service, tears welled in her eyes, not of regret, but of hope. She had not lost everything. She had simply needed to let go of the past, to make room for the present.